Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Advisory. It's still February, so we are going to continue 2 more lessons today and Friday about healthy relationships. Today, we're going to be answering this question. What are boundaries? I'm going to explain kind of what they mean and why they are important to establish in any kind of relationship. But first, at the beginning of this series over healthy relationships, I sent a form out and offered you to ask any questions about healthy relationships you wanted, and I filmed a few of my responses to a few of those questions. So we'll do some today and some Friday, but here are a few of your questions and my attempts to answer them. And I tried to group up the good questions that I got into categories. And so the first category of questions is all about friendships. How can you tell if you're friends with someone or if just someone who they talk to sometimes? This is kind of pointing out the different levels of friendships that they are. Not every friend that you ever have is going to be your very closest friend. Sometimes people are just acquaintances. You're friendly with people, or there's somebody that you see a lot, maybe in class, maybe at work. But really, I think to discern between good friends and acquaintances, it really has to do with what you talk about, how comfortable you feel with that person, and how much of yourself you actually share, and how much of themselves that they share with you. Porque muchas amistades suelen ser tóxicas, or why do many friendships tend to be toxic? I think that a lot of the times, especially when you are young, good friendships can be hard to come by, especially since everyone is young and figuring things out. And so sometimes when people are learning how to be good to people, they involve themselves in relationships in toxic ways, but hopefully they learn from those experiences how to be a better friend. They realize what part of their behavior was toxic, and they try to fix it in future friendships. But I think that much more people are out there just trying to be good to each other and just trying to be good friends. Sometimes we don't do it all the best. Sometimes we have to learn lessons the hard way. But the goal here is to find relationships and friendships that are not toxic, that are good for you. And that can take a long time to do. The next questions were about conflicts and resolutions. How do you get past the stage where you argue a lot? Well, I would say that the stage where you argue a lot is not really something that should necessarily exist as a stage. It shouldn't be super normal for you to go just through one phase where you're always in conflict and you're always kind of at each other about something, and then you just get over it later. The fact is that throughout a relationship, arguments are going to happen in varying degrees throughout the entire relationship. It's not just one stage. But if you find that you are arguing a lot and that nothing is really getting done and that the arguments aren't very productive and you don't really feel like the two of you are moving forward, then that might be indication that you shouldn't be in that relationship. Yes, you will argue and not everything will be perfect, but those arguments should not take over the entire relationship to where you feel like that is all that is happening. How can you help the other person understand the problem or understand the problem from your perspective? I think this takes a lot of patience. I think first you have to be very clear with yourself about what the issue is and what the problem is so that you can clearly communicate it to another person. And then if you clearly communicate it and you do so with kindness and you do so in a way that seeks to build bridges and the other person still can't see things from your perspective, then that's not really a you problem, that's a them problem. Conversations are 2 ways. It's not just you trying to get somebody to understand something and them just not understanding it. They should always make an attempt to understand you as you make an attempt to understand them. How do you communicate with someone who tries to make everything your fault? Again, I would call this a them problem, not a you problem. If you have tried to communicate clearly and with kindness and they still will not hear things that you're trying to say, or they're doing what this person is saying, which is trying to turn everything around on you, then that might not be a healthy situation for you, because that's the other person saying about themselves, oh, it couldn't be me, it's got to be something else. It's got to be someone else's fault. And that just tells me that they are not self-reflecting or trying to make themselves the best version that they can be, and instead they're trying to find some fault with you. So if you try to communicate kindly and clearly and they still try to make everything your fault, it may not be a healthy situation. The next one, does not settling an argument and then deciding not to speak on it or bring it up ever again considered unhealthy? I got a couple of other questions kind of in this same category, like, is it necessary to always speak your feelings? And if you are uncomfortable, do you keep it to yourself because you don't want them to feel bad? I would say to this question, is it necessary to always speak your feelings? You don't have to say every single little thought that comes into your head, but if there is something about a relationship or an argument that you have with someone that you're in a relationship with that doesn't sit right with you and that you don't feel listened to and that you don't feel like the problem actually got resolved in a way that benefited both of you, if you then decide to not talk about it and press it down and not talk about your feelings just because you don't want to make them feel bad, then yes, I would call that unhealthy because there is no communication in that. What can happen is that the person who has the problem with the other person but doesn't tell them can hold on to those feelings for a really, really long time until it explodes or comes out sideways in a way that is mean or hurtful or that does damage to both people. So I would say it is always best, especially with strong feelings about the relationship or about some sort of conflict that you and the other person have. It is very important to be able to voice those feelings. And if you don't feel like you can voice those feelings without the other person getting mad or feeling bad, then it may not be a healthy situation. All right, so what are boundaries? Let's just start with a definition. A boundary is an imaginary line that separates me from you. It separates your physical space, your feelings, your needs, and responsibilities from others. Your boundaries also tell other people how they can treat you, what's acceptable, and what is not. So boundaries in your life help you maintain your own individuality, and it also helps to convey to others how you would like to be treated. Whether you're in friendships or romantic relationships, you can decide for yourself what is acceptable and what is not in that relationship. There are a few different types of boundaries, but they exist in multiple areas of life. They can be emotional boundaries, lines that you set for yourself to decide who is and is not close to you emotionally. Emotional boundaries can also help prevent other people's emotions from influencing yours. If you have good emotional boundaries, for instance, if someone is really, really anxious about something, there's a boundary that says, you can be anxious about that, but I'm not going to get anxious about that. There are physical boundaries, what you do and don't do with your own body. Digital boundaries, what you allow into your social media presence or online presence, or even who you allow to text and who you text. Professional boundaries in any workplace. Professional boundaries are there to make sure that everything goes well in the workplace and that work doesn't spill over into life and life doesn't spill over into work. And they can be financial, like who you give your money to, what you do with your money, things like that. So here are some examples of boundaries that someone might set. I'm cool with following each other on social media, but not with sharing passwords. I'm comfortable kissing and holding hands, but not in public. I'm okay with regularly texting, but I don't want to text multiple times in an hour. I want to spend time with my friends and family on the weekends. I need quiet time to myself right now. I'm comfortable with some touching, but I'm not ready to have sex. These are all examples of emotional and physical and other types of boundaries that you might set with people that you are in a relationship with. It's explaining very clearly what you are and are not okay with. And of course, you need to properly communicate those boundaries. And these are some of the ways that you can let the other person know what your boundaries are. I really like it when blank. I'm not comfortable when whatever. When this happens, I feel this way. All of these are great ways to start the conversation on what your boundaries actually are. But whether you're in a friendship or a relationship, you also want to find out what their boundaries are. Because you want them to respect yours, you have to respect theirs. So you can ask them things like, is this okay, or are you cool with blank? Or just listening to them and asking them what they expect or want out of your friendship or relationship. The most important thing is when someone tells you what their boundaries are, when they have been clearly communicated, you have to respect them. If those boundaries change, which they can at any time, you have to respect the new boundaries. And here's a very important point regarding boundaries. If someone continually crosses your boundaries, or if they react angrily to you setting boundaries, they do not have your best interests in mind. Maybe it'll take a while to establish boundaries, and that might be confusing and stressful for a time. But this is if someone knows what your boundaries are and they continually cross them, or they react angrily when you try to stand up for yourself or set new boundaries. Those are the people that you need to watch out for. Those are the people that probably need to do some self-reflection before they themselves are ready for any sort of healthy relationship. And the last point that I'll make here about boundaries today is that you don't want to use boundaries or the idea of boundaries to try to control someone else. That's not the proper way to think about what boundaries are. So, for example, a healthy boundary would be, I need space to hang out with my friends by myself. Totally normal, very okay, should not be a problem with someone who is in a healthy relationship. What is sort of an unhealthy version of that is, I need you to stop talking to other guys or girls because I might get jealous or you might cheat. This is not even an example of a boundary, but oftentimes when people don't understand what boundaries are and they're trying to gain control over a situation, they might say something like this. This is not a boundary. This is an attempt to control, and usually that's because the person who is trying to control is a little bit insecure or hasn't dealt with the emotions that they are dealing with themselves. So just keep that in mind. These examples that we went over before, those are a good, healthy way to communicate what kind of boundaries you want to set. All right, so our activity today is going to test your knowledge over boundaries. On the next few slides, you're going to see 3 fictional scenarios of boundaries being crossed. You're going to read each scenario out loud, then discuss the questions either in small group or as a class. So you'll go through the next 3 scenarios and read through them and answer these 2 questions every time. What were the boundaries and how were they crossed? And how could have both parties communicated more clearly, and what might that conversation sound like? And there are 3 different scenarios for you to consider. And that's all from me for today. On Friday, we will wrap up our series over healthy relationships, and we will have more student questions. For now, enjoy the activities on the next slide. Be good to yourself and others, and I'll see you real soon.